Hey, Zion Amud Aleph, 87a. We are.
Just do a quick 30-second.
Bring up to speed. Yeah, we'll do that.
Just to make sure.
Yeah, we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines from the top of the page, second word. And the last thing we had, actually, going forward is a kind of it's related to tshuva, but it's like a new section, if you will, kind of. But the last thing we talked about was, just to refresh your memory, we talked about scholars who would keep themselves in check before they go to court, they would tell themselves of the responsibility they have to be in court and that anything going wrong, they take responsibility for. And we learned about this two scholars who, as the community were giving them honors, they would remind themselves that their humanity, their physicality, the mortality of the mortality and their physicality is not only temporary. That's reminding them that it's not. They shouldn't let the power get to their head.
Thursday, I left early, but I listened to the whole lecture.
Friday, you missed it?
Friday, I couldn't because 8 o'clock I had to be working.
You have to listen to the online cheer.
That is why I never listened to the online cheer because I don't remember.
Right.
So this is why I'm a little confused and a little off, which means tonight I'm going to watch Fridays.
Okay. So they're independent from each other, so it's good you can do that. Today's cheer is independent from them.
Now I get it.
Okay, so the pasuk reads. Pasuk is in.
That's why.
The pasuk is in Mishlei, and reads as follows: Se'es pnei resha loy toiv, which means se'es pnei resha means like to bestow goodness. It's like to uplift, to basically to do well with the wicked is to his detriment. It's not doing him a favor. The fact that he's having a good life is the point. As the Gemara explains, it's not to their benefit of the wicked. That we show graciousness. That's the right word, I think. To be gracious with them. Seis panim literally means to lift up a face. It means to be gracious with them. So it's not good. It's to their own detriment that they're being shown graciousness by Elam Haz in this physical world. And the explanation, the understanding of this is that because Hashem, let's say a wicked person has some redemptive point. Let's say there's one point in his life which was a positive point. So by the fact that they have a good life now is in payment for the one time they did something nice, which therefore means when they reach the world to come, then they're at a point where they have no more credit, as it were. So it ended up not being a favor for them that they got their credit was paid up in the physical world. It would have been much better for them had they suffered here and pay off, as it were, some of the debt of their misbehavior and come to the world to come and have a redemptive quality, and then they can enjoy at least something of the world to come. And therefore, the Gemara is saying it's not to their benefit that they have a good life here. That's the Gemara saying. It's not to the benefit of the wicked. They're showing graciousness in this world. I think Gemara says an example. It's not good for Achav, the king Achav. And the story here is, the details are interesting, and the psukim are interesting. It's a chapter in Book of Kings. Achav is a king of the north. He's a king of the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom. And his wife is Izebel. And there's a property that he really wants from Novos. And he says he's not interested in selling to the king. Izebel is offended on her husband's behalf, Jezebel. And she schemes to have this guy killed. She has false witnesses testify against something he did terribly, and they stone him to death. And then Achav marches in and takes the field that he wanted. Hashem sends a message to Eliyahu Hanavi, to Achav, through Elijah the prophet to Achav, that Hashem is extremely upset, and then he uses very harsh words to describe that Hashem is going to leave no remnant of Achav. And Achav renders his garments in a kind of regret or kind of like supplication. And therefore Hashem says, oh, I'm not going to do what I promised to him. After he passes, maybe his children won't do so well, or in the world to come he won't do so well, but I am taking back what I've said about destroying him here in this physical world. And the Gemara is commenting that was not to Achaz's benefit. Because that little moment of humility was paid off in the fact that he had a good reign, and in the world to come, not so great. As the Marsha points out, that the Gemara here is referring to the world to come as in the time of Mashiach, because the Gemara mentions in Yoma, which we learned a few months ago, that Achav is on the list of kings who lost their share in the world to come. And maybe if he would have taken some suffering, as it were, in this world, and in that moment of humility would have been enough to save him, perhaps. This is what seems to be from the way Mashal is explaining this. So the Gemara cites the verse in which Hashem says, so it wasn't good for him, to King Achav, Hashem showed him graciousness in this world. As the verse reads, considering the fact, says God to Eliyahu, that Achav showed humility before me, I won't show him any negativity in his lifetime, but only afterwards, yes, not during his lifetime. And that was to his detriment, because after his lifetime was worse, as it were. Now the Gemara says in the inverse, continuing the verse quoted earlier, where it's not good for the wicked that they are shown graciousness. And the verse continues, to steer the judgment for the righteous, end quote of the verse. So even though the simple meaning of the verse is something else, as the Marsha points out, but the Gemara says as follows. It's good for the righteous that they are not shown graciousness in this world. Because if they have one small stain on their reputation, as it were, and they suffer in this life to make up for it, as it were, and they come to the world to come, they're a clean slate. And the Gemara cites an example, in the same way the Gemara gave an example before by Achav. Now the Gemara gives an example for a righteous who took the punishment for the little bit of negativity in this world. And this actually much more strongly proves, or at least supports, the Marsha's reading that we're talking about Mashiach's time rather than life after death, as we'll see. Because the example of the Gemara gives us like this. It's good for Moshe. Hashem didn't show him graciousness in this world by forgiving him for when he hit the rock. Hashem didn't forgive him in this world. Right? He didn't go to Eretz Yisrael. He died in this world. And therefore it's good for him, as it were, because the world to come. As the verse reads, this is the verse we quoted before. Hashem tells Moshe and Aaron, you didn't have trust in me, you didn't have trust in me to talk to the rock, and therefore you did not, you would have sanctified my name had you had trust in me, but you didn't. And therefore, the Gemara comments, had they had faith in Hashem and spoken to the rock, they would still not have reached a time when they should have passed away. So the Gemara is saying that they wouldn't have left this world. What does that mean? Seemingly would mean that they would have entered into the era of Mashiach, which perhaps supports what we said a couple of last week. Sorry? At that point, maybe not later. Yeah, that's a good point. It could just mean that they didn't have, it wouldn't have come to that time yet, but it would come later at the end of their life. They passed. Actually, Marsha seems to supply that way, that they died early. Yeah, okay, you're right. Yeah, but perhaps to me, it supports what we're talking about last week, that their time wouldn't have come to leave this world, as if to say they would have entered into a Messianic era because they were perfect, but it would have left behind their community who was not perfect. So perhaps that's right. So that's exactly, which is why they're in other words, sorry? Right. But it would seem that they would have gone to Eretz Yisrael, right? Going to Eretz Yisrael would have been a whole different level. But they didn't go into Eretz Yisrael. Perhaps it's kind of related. Anyway. what's interesting though is we have more on this from the Gemara later, but Achav renders his garments, right? And that's why he was saved in this world, because he had that one moment of truth, connection. But nonetheless, it didn't count as teshuvah, the moment he rendered his garments. Because as we talked about, teshuvah is not about feeling bad or sorry for yourself. It's about making a decision to change one's ways, and that's not something Achav did. But nonetheless, the one little moment where he did have the humility, even though it didn't lead to teshuvah, was still a moment that Hashem considered as valuable and true. Not enough to change his determination for the world to come, but clearly it was a true moment because at least it gave him a physically good life.
Would you also say it was also because he was in the presence of Hashem when the prophet came to him?
Yeah.
Bringing the words of Hashem, it was more he was in the presence of Hashem at the same time, and that also brought about his more humility.
So
even though he's a king, he's in front of a greater king.
It's interesting you say that because when Eliyahu first comes to him, he actually makes fun of him. When Eliyahu first comes to him, he says to him, "Did you find your enemy?" Talking about himself, like, "I'm your enemy." So you found me. You found your enemy. Kind of poking fun at him. But then when Eliyahu relays the harsh message, he breaks down. So obviously, it was like I might suggest even that it indicates to you that more than punishing Achav, Hashem was hoping he would change his way. And it almost got there. Right? The expression goes, you can bring the horse to the water, you can't force him to drink. So Hashem sent Eliyahu to bring Achav all the way to the water. And it almost got there. He broke down and rent his garment, but not enough to implement action. Which I guess kind of teaches you that all the good intentions are very nice and they're very valuable, and Hashem values them. Unless the person acts upon these things. So we're going to pat you on the head and say, it's nice you felt good about yourself and you felt sorry about yourself, but you didn't change it. You didn't change. Perhaps. Yeah. Okay. The Gemara continues. Ashrayim latzadikim. Fortunate are the righteous. Not only do they get meritorious because of their good stand and behavior, but they provide a certain merit to their children, grandchildren, to the end of time. To the end of time. How many children did Aaron have? That it would have been appropriate for them to be consumed like Nadav and Avihu. Nadav and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron, who entered the Holy Holies inappropriately. Exactly how they entered inappropriately and what they did is a matter of discussion, all kinds of commentary, exactly how they entered inappropriately, but that's the general consensus. And of course, so this says it's taken what the essence of all those different interpretations are, but they entered the Holy of Holies inappropriately at a time that they shouldn't have, in a manner that they shouldn't have. And therefore they were consumed by a holy fire, right? So their sin, even on a simple level, wasn't in spite of Hashem, as it were, but in over enthusiasm for Hashem, that they ran into the temple when they weren't supposed to, and they just got consumed into we started the Gemara, even Rashi says that their bodies remain whole, their souls expired. It wasn't the death of you did something terrible, smite you down, but much more of their soul expired, as it were, because they went into the Holy of Holies when they weren't supposed to. And it seems that, as we'll see in a moment, the Gemara is telling us from the Pesukim that it seems that other children of Aaron should have had the same thing. They also should have died in the same manner. But, as Shinar's verse reads, Hanaisarim, the children that were left behind, as if to say they should have also died, but they were just left behind. And therefore, but the merit of their father Abraham protected them. Sorry? For Nadav and Avihu? Why do you suggest that? Yeah. Oh. Okay, that's not. Yeah, these things. We talked about this before. How like Hashem has a plan for a certain thing. It could have come a different way, or it could have come there's still free choice involved. At any rate, so the point here is that the Gemara is saying that Aaron's merit protected his children. What's interesting, I'm just putting this out there. I don't have an answer to it. I'm just telling you the question that I'm thinking of is the Gemara just stated that it lasts forever and ever. And it brings a proof from someone who lasts the next generation, who themselves were great righteous people. And yet the Gemara states emphatically earlier that it goes forever and ever to the end of time, which is interesting. And then the Gemara says a similar thing in the inverse. I'm just putting the question out there. Sorry? Right, but the Gemara could have said that. The Gemara could have said, what's the proof? Because Hashem says Aaron and his children are kind of forever. That's what the Gemara could have said, right? But it doesn't. The proof, though, is not that. That's not the proof text. That would have been a very interesting proof text, which would have resolved the issue that I'm asking, but it's not the proof text. The proof text is children who should have died but didn't die. It's interesting. Anyway, just putting that out there. Also, another thing is that 2 of Aaron's children did die, so it didn't work for everybody. It only worked for some.
Yeah, but
Which is why I guess to point to Alan's point that it didn't work for some because of a fault of Aaron's. Or perhaps the Gemara is pushing us and telling us that just because your grandfather was a righteous person doesn't mean you're absolved. You still got to work on your own. And therefore these 2 messed up, and the schus will help you. The merits will help you. But it's not going to save you. It's not going to save you completely. You have to work on your own. You have to do something. And if someone messes up, even if they have great grandparents that are amazing, not going to work for them. They tell us in yeshiva, I don't know who or where this line originated from, but they tell us that YICHUS, as in having good lineage, grandfather, is like a bunch of zeros. And the question is, if you put a 1 at the end, so you have a list of zeros and you put a 1 at the end, it becomes a billion. But if you don't contribute your little 1, then all the yichus is very nice, but it doesn't go anywhere. Right? So maybe it's something like that. Aaron's list lasts forever and ever. That's true. But you have to put your little contribution and it works. Then the Gemara says the same thing in the inverse, and we'll conclude with this. Woe is to the wicked. Not only is that it brings themselves liability, it causes liability for them, their grandchildren, great-grandchildren, unto all eternity. Masha asks, why is it that it goes forever and ever? Seemingly there's a verse elsewhere which says it only goes for 4 generations. And perhaps the answer is, as we're going to see in a moment, that it's not referring to Jewish people. Because the Gemara says this, Canaan had many children. It's one of the grandchildren of Noah, who got the curse. And many of these grandchildren, they could have got smicha, which means they could have got ordained in their worthiness of learning, like Tevi, Avdei Rabbi Gamliel, who was a servant of Rabbi Gamliel. He's one of famous, like a butler, if you will, of Rabbi Gamliel. He was a servant who Rabbi Gamliel freed later for a minion. But this Tevi, Rabbi Gamliel very much relied on him. He was a scholar. He wasn't just a butler who carried his clothing, but he was a person who Rabbi Gamliel would rely on for Torah teaching and for Torah sharing and discussing. So the Gemara is saying many grandchildren, and Tevi came from Canaan, from that lineage. And many other people could have been like him, but they weren't, because Canaan messed up and he got the curse and he got stuck onto eternity. So again, you see 2 things. First of all, it's not referring to a Jew, at least the proof text is not a Jew. Canaan is not a Jew. Number 1. Number 2, even someone like Canaan, who has that curse which goes on to eternity, if someone wants to, they can still be like Tevi, like the servant. Just like before, a person can have a righteous grandfather, and it doesn't mean that it's going to work for him always. Just like the Gemara's proof text says that Aaron saved 2 of his sons, but the same proof text says he lost 2 of his sons. Right? So likewise, the proof text here, even someone like Canaan, So even though, in other words, the Gemara is giving us two things at once. On the one hand, the Gemara is telling you that your behavior has consequences for your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, onto all eternity. So be very careful about how you behave. A. B. Simultaneously, the Gemara is also saying, just because your grandparents behaving a certain way doesn't mean you're stuck there. You can grow out of it. You can both gain and you could ruin in both directions. Okay. A wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you.